Vayakhel Pekudei. Chelek Chof Aleph. We're learning in the schos of Rav Shlema for Rav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasia. Seif Aleph. Be'inyan Shemos HaParshios, regarding the names of the distinct Parshios of the Torah, Hudgash Kfar Pamim Rabbis, it has been underscored numerous times, Shahat Toichen Shel Kol Parsha Merumaz B'Shma, that the content of each Parsha is alluded to in its name. V'chein tzarech loimer gam b'Parshas Vayakhel Pekudei. And likewise, we have to say the same about this week's Parshas Vayakhel and Pekudei. Shahashem Vayakhel mivates nekudas techna shel Parsha Rishona, that the name Vayakhel has to seemingly express the central point of the first Parsha, Pekudei, and the name Pekudei as nekuda techna shel Parsha Shniya has to be an apt expression of the central point of the second Parsha. Ulam l'chayr, however, seemingly, ein hatama bein techna shel shtei parshas elu lishmaisehem. There doesn't seem to be alignment between the content of these two parshas and their names. V'yeser al kain, and even more, lo yizu b'vat she'ein him matimim zeh lazeh, elahim af hafchim zeh mizeh b'technam. Not only do they not seem aligned, they actually seem to be opposing, contradictory to the content of the parsha that they are supposed to represent. As the Rebbe is going to explain now. Vayakhel, the name Vayakhel, lefi pshuta perushay asifa v'kibut shel kama v'chama yechidim epratim. Seemingly, the name Vayakhel is defined as a gathering or a bringing together of disparate parts, different things. V'hachiluk ben halashon Vayakhel or ben l'shonos acherim hamitzayim hitztarfu shel kama yechidim epratim yachad k'goyin asifa, kibbutz, lekita, or kedayma. And the Rebbe says that the difference between the term Vayakhel and similar terms that speak to the idea of gathering or amalgam of distinct aspects into one. For example, asifa, which means a meeting, kibbutz, which means a gathering, lekita, which is often used in agricultural context to bring together. So the difference between Vayakhel and these other seemingly similar terms is sheshar haloshonos mabim rakas etzem ha'is asfus v'hahiskaptus shel mispar b'nei adam pratim l'mokem echad or le'inyan echad. The other terms, asifa, kibbutz, lekita, speak or express the idea that you're bringing them together. You're bringing different facets or aspects or details together to one place, or you're putting them in one category. Achitachein shagam la'achri hasifa chule adayin kol echad mehanesafim noisar metzius nifredes b'fnei atzma. But it is still altogether possible that even after you bring together these disparate things or people or aspects into one, they still retain their individuality. In contradistinction, v'ilu lashon Vayakhel, but the term, the first name of the first parsha Vayakhel, mashmu'oto shenasu lekahol. But when you use the term Vayakhel, the implication is that the individual have become part of something new called a kohol. V'hu misyaches leklal, and this is referring to a collective. Shel ha'anashim hayapratim, whether you're talking about a collective of people or of details. Shenoitzar, it's something new that has been created Loi kitziro shel kama pratim nifradim. It's not just a composite of various smaller aspects. Ela kafi shehem nasim kulam yachad lemetzius chadasha kohol echad. But rather, each one yields their individuality to something larger and something new, a new mitziut, a new existence, and that is the kohol. So that's regarding Vayakhel. Pekudei shepirusha miloshan minyan. Pekudei, on the other hand, which is a term that denotes counting, delineation. Moira alayosei shall kol davar nifrod umuvdal b'fnei atzmai. So Pekudei, on the other hand, is the polar opposite. It's all about how things remain separate, individuated. Asher az dafka yesh makam le'inyan hasfira, and it is only when you can define and you can recognize the individuality and the separateness of things that you can count them out as separate from and distinct from other things. Va'al pizeh eina muvan. So once we have looked a little bit more carefully at the terms Vayakhel and Pekudei, it's not understood. When you look at the content of the parsha, it seems that the content of the parsha is diametrically opposed to its name. It's true, while both parshas speak of the creation of the Mishkan and the making of the various kelim, the various vestments, but there's a very different energy about the two parshas. Parshas Vayakhel, Oisekes, V'asiyas, Kol Chelkei Uprate Inyani HaMishkan. In the main, Parshas Vayakhel speaks to the particular, the individual, the distinct. It talks about the details of the Mishkan. Hayiriyos b'fnei atzman, the curtains in and of themselves. Hakrushim b'fnei atzmam, it discusses the planks distinctly. V'chein kol echad miklei hamishkan b'fnei atzmai, hamenorah, hashulchan, and in like fashion, every aspect of the Mishkan is treated separately, distinctly. V'ilu hachidush shel parshas Pekudei b'negei lemlechet hamishkan hu. On the other hand, the novelty of Parshas Pekudei as it relates to the whole subject of the Mishkan being crafted and made is la'achar ha'akdama, after what the first thing, the preface, Sach hakol shel hazav ha'kesef ha'nachayshes ba k'maimar muskar sima mesubar Parshas Vayakhel. So after you have the sum total that is listed of the gold and the silver and the copper, which really comes as a sidebar to what we're talking about, then we have kind of a summation of the whole idea of building the Mishkan, which is Havaz kol hadvarim yachdav el Moshe. Everything together is brought before Moshe. V'tzivu Hashem lahamidam kulam yachad hakamas hamishkan mechol kelav. And then we have the command of Hashem that the Mishkan should be erected in its totality, in its completion. V'imay hatzivu al kol avodosav shel hamishkan kishehem muskaris rak bechlolos. And likewise, we have the commandment about all the different works, all of the different types of avodah that were done in the Mishkan, as they are treated in a general way. V'chein kiyum hadavar b'poel hakol yachad ha'akama v'ha'avodos al yidei Moshe. And then we have reference to how this was actually done. It was all done together through Moshe. Ad asher nasa hakol mishkan sholem echad u'kvoid Hashem maleis hamishkan. Until we have the completion of the Mishkan, it's all one thing, and the glory of Hashem fills the Mishkan. So, in the parsha that's called Vayakhel, we seem to have a focus on the individuated, on the distinct, on the particular, the way in which everything is separate. And in the parsha that's called Pekudei, which seems to mean to enumerate, to delineate, which would speak to the separation and the distinctiveness, the main point of the parsha is how the Mishkan is one klal, one collective. Ulafizeh, and once you understand this, it emerges that the content of the parsha is the polar opposite of the name. Parshas Vayakhel b'yachas Mishkan hu prate v'chelki Mishkan kol echad kiprat u'metzias la'atzmai v'lo ha'inish shel Vayakhel. In Vayakhel, again, we find the individuation of every aspect of the Mishkan, the opposite of what it would seem, because the name of the parsha is Vayakhel, which means to gather, to make it into one collective. The Ilube Parshas Pekudei, and in Parshas Pekudei, which seems to be about enumerating the individual, we find there appears the bringing together and the combination of all of the aspects. The way in which all the individual aspects and details and particles become one collective. HaMishkan b'shleimusei, the Mishkan in its total completion. Hefach hadgasha shebepekudei. Minyan hainu shekol prat nimna b'fnei atzmai. And again, this is the opposite of what seems to be underscored by the name Pekudei, which is about counting, enumerating. That is focusing on how each detail is different from the other. Beis. Rebbe says, on a simple level, we could reconcile this by saying the following. Perush Vayakhel b'pshuta shel mikra hu hakolas kol b'nei Yisrael. On the simple level, Vayakhel is referring to the way in which b'nei Yisrael are being gathered into one collective. Ulefizeh, Efshar levar gam es hakesher bein Vayakhel al shem hakolas b'nei Yisrael lemlechas hamishkan hamisuperes la'achrei zeh. So we could build on this, and we could say that it's called Vayakhel because it's talking about the way in which b'nei Yisrael are gathered, and this serves as a preface, as a prelude to the construction of the Mishkan. Inyan Vayakhel shakol b'nei Yisrael nasu kol echad hu hakdama v'hachana lasiyas hamishkan. The gathering of the Jews, the way in which the Jews become part of something larger, is the preface and the preparation for making the Mishkan. Kedei shehamishkan yeh mishkan shel klal Yisrael v'asuli mikdash shechanti b'soicham b'soich kol Yisrael. In order for the Mishkan to be the place that unites all of the Jews and to actually bring to fruition that Hashem says, make me a place where I can reside amongst you. So therefore, Trumas and Udavas kol yachid mi Yisrael mlechas hamishkan tzrich liyetz ba'efen sheyufka mimenu geder mammon yachid. Because this is going to be something collective, because it's going to be something that is for everyone, so the donations and the gifts from each distinctive Jew towards the construction of the Mishkan has to be in such a way that the distinctive ownership of the money has to be done away with. That their distinctive ownership has to dissipate. Sheyufka mimenu geder mammon yachid, mammon bebailus yechidim rabim, va'afilu geder mammon shutfim yechidim anasim l'shutfim, v'yiyeh mammon bebailus matzias achais, mammon tzibor. The Rebbe is saying that the money has to leave ownership of one individual person. Even when people are partnered, that's not good enough. The money has to become money that belongs to the tzibor. So in other words, Vayakhel is not talking about the aspects of the Mishkan. It's talking about the way in which Bnei Yisrael become part of something larger. They become a kohol. Why is this important? Because they have to divest themselves of their distinctiveness, of, let's say, their ownership of their gold, their silver, their copper. It has to become part of something that belongs to them all. And so therefore the hakdama, the preface to this is gathering all of Bnei Israel. They should become one kahal. Then all their money becomes a collective, and then they're in a position to build something collective. But the Rebbe says, "Avaladayin hashe'ela be'ina." But still, this question persists and is obvious. B'negei Pekudei, but this still doesn't answer the question of Pekudei. Sheba loy matzinu minyan. Pekudei means to enumerate, and we don't find that anything is being enumerated. On the contrary, we find the way in which there's a general rounding up of all the materials, rather than an enumeration. And the Rebbe says, and ube'emes, and in truth, gam b'negei Vayakhel ein habir hanal maspik. The possible thesis that I've set forth is not enough. And now the Rebbe gives us his antithesis. He says, because once we understand that everything about Torah is very, very specific and it's complete. In other words, it's not, everything in the Torah is perfect in its specificity. So move on. So it's understood that just like we have this rule that the name of something has to express its content, so then it must be true about the names of the parshas. So b'inyanenu, and specifically the names that we are looking at today, Vayakhel, shahashem eina mivate rakas ha'hakdama l'teichen ha'ikri shel ha'parsha, elagam es hanekuda ha'ikri shela. So it's not good enough to say that Vayakhel is a appropriate name for this parsha because it speaks to a preparatory aspect to the building of the Mishkan. No, the Rebbe says, that doesn't ring true for me. I don't accept that, because it has to be that the name of the parsha speaks to the general and most important aspect of the parsha, not to something that is simply preparatory. So we're left with the original question, which is that seemingly the names of the parshas are flipped. They're in the wrong place. It should have been Pekudei Vayakhel, because Pekudei speaks more accurately about what's happening in Parshas Pekudei, and Vayakhel expresses more accurately what's happening in Pekudei. Gimel. V'yuvan, and we'll understand the answer to this. Behektim divrei harambam b'sefer hamitzvos b'negei lemitzvos binyan beis hamikdash. We'll understand this by prefacing with the words of the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, where he speaks about the mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash. And he says there, Shetzivonu, livnois Beis HaBchira La'avoda, we were commanded to build the chosen house to serve Hashem. B'yiyeh hakraba v'havaras ha'esh tamid. There will be the bringing close the sacrifices. There will be the the Eish Tamid, the eternal light, v'chulei, etc. V'hu amar yis'ala ba'asuli mikdash, and this is what Hashem said, that you should make for me a mikdash. Ubehemshach lekach kasab, and then in the continuum, the Rambam says shezeh haklal kolel minim rabim, that this general imperative, this general commandment, includes a lot of specificities. HaMenorah, the HaShulchan, the HaMizbeach, Vizulasam, Kula Mechelki HaMikdash, and there's other parts of the Mikdash, V'hakol yikari mikdash, and all of it is referred to in the term mikdash. Ukfar yiched hatzivoy b'chol chelek b'chelek. And elsewhere, it's already enumerated the commandment for each distinctive part. B'tzarech lahaven. The Rebbe says we have to understand the terminology of the Rambam. Once the Rambam writes that all of the distinctive aspects are parts of the mikdash, and they all fall under the general term mikdash, hainu shehim pratim mitay chaklal, meaning that they are details of a larger category. Mitzvahs aseh v'asuli mikdash, they are part of the positive commandment to build a mikdash for Hashem. So then why does the Rambam double back? And at the end of this, he says, and it's already been enumerated, it's already been commanded on each and every aspect. Dvarim hamadgishim l'chayre teichan hafchi. It would seem that first he tells us that all of the particulars are subsumed by the larger category, and then he doubles back and he says, but there was already a commandment on each particular aspect, which would seem to underscore the opposite. Shekol chelek v'chelek miklei hamikdash hu inim b'fnei atzmai u mitzvah b'fnei atzmai. That every part of the mikdash is a distinctive aspect and it's its own mitzvah. So which is it? Is it a general mitzvah, or is each keli a specific mitzvah in and of itself? Ubechlal, and in general, the Rebbe says, Lamai nafka mina hisafa zu shebedivrei Rambam sham. And in general, why does the Rambam go back to say that? It seems like he's already said his piece, and he told us what the mitzvah is, and that all the sub aspects of the mitzvah are part of the general mitzvah. So it seems like it's just extra. It's superfluous. It's just hanging there. Dalet. V'yesh loymar hasbara b'zeh. The Rebbe says we might say the following is the explanation. Geder shaychusam shel klei hamishkan el hamishkan atzmai efshar lefarish bekama oifanim. In discussing the connection between the individual kelim of the Mishkan and the larger construct of the Mishkan, you can treat the connection in various ways. And the Rebbe says, Me'ein ha'ifanim she'efshar lamar b'negea l'kol klal hamurkav mifratim. And in general, there are different ways of understanding the relationship between subsidiary aspects and the general construct that is comprised of these different aspects. And the Rebbe is going to give us 3 ways of understanding this relationship. There are 3 modalities. Aleph. One is, Kol echad min hapratim einoi mitzius b'fnei atzmai. Each one of the details is not reckoned as an independent existence. V'chol mitziusoi hi rak ma she'al yedei hisachtos kulam yachad nasis mitzius achas. But rather, it's only through bringing all these subsidiary aspects together that you get one existence. And that one existence is the klal, is the general existence. Benusach acher, to say this differently, mitzius hapratim eina ela hechsher bilvad lemitzius haklal. The existence of the details is only preparatory for the existence of the general thing. So in and of themselves, they don't have real mitzius, real viability. And the Rebbe gives something, he says, me'ein dugma lazeh, something of an example of this, is the idea of geder chatzi shir l'das Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish taught about what status does something have that is considered chatzi shiur. It's only half of an amount that is considered a viable amount in halacha. He taught shechatzi shiur mutar min haTorah, that from the Torah you're allowed to eat, let's say, this half measurement of something that is not permitted to be eaten. It's only when you bring together two half shiurim, nasis mitzias chadasha, then you've created something new. And then there's a novelty. And what happened when you bring the two halves, two small pieces of pork together? It became a shear of pork, and you're not allowed to eat it. But each half by itself, it doesn't have the existence of something that's asur. That's one way of understanding the particularities and how they relate to the general base. But then there's another way of understanding it. Gam haprotim bifnei atzmam hemitzius. In this modality, the details are a distinctive existence. Ella, it's only sha'al yedei hitztarfusam yachad, when they are joined together, hem yotzim gam inyan chadash. In addition to their individuated existence, when you put them together in the amalgam, you've created something additionally new that didn't exist before. When every individual was for themselves. An example, take the example of 10 Jews that are put together for the purpose of being able to say certain parts of davening that are referred to as Dvarim Shebekdusha. In that instance, Kol Adam Yisrael B'fnei Atzma Yesh Bei Kedusha. Each Jew in and of themselves has holiness, has distinctiveness. But when you join 10 of them together, gam kedusha na'alis yoser. You've also created a higher level of kedusha in addition to their individuated kedusha. And therefore, you can say certain parts of davening that you couldn't say without their being joined together as a kahal. So far to review. The first modality speaks to the fact that the particular doesn't really have its own viable existence. It's only when it's conjoined that it becomes something that you have to reckon with. In the second modality, you're saying, no, the individual has Kedusha. The individual has its own distinctive existence. It has viability. But when you put them together, now you've gotten something additional and much larger, much more potent, much more holy, whatever term you want to use.
Rivky, can I ask a question?
Sure, always.
Thank you. In the first example, where you're using the idea of pork, and when it's combined, it's usher, and when it's separate, is there a positive example that the Rebbe gives about that?
Well, first, I just want to say that the Rebbe says, I don't have an example right off the bat. I'll tell you that, so you don't think I'm just just a ploy that I'm not addressing your question. But I just want to bring up that the Rebbe says shechatzi shir mutar min haTorah. I just want to underscore, because I don't think I did, that min haTorah, it's only chatzi shir, so you could eat it, but obviously we can't eat it. It's still okay. Do I have a positive example? I don't have one off the bat, but maybe somebody else does.
Because I sometimes learn this over with some of the, and I just wanted something that they could relate to in a positive, uplifting. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think it's exactly the same thing, but what's coming to mind is the famous Hayom Yom about when two Jews are together, their nefesh halakhi joined together. But it's not the same thing, because I don't think you could say that when we're separate. It's more like an example of the second modality than the first.
Okay.
I don't know. It's not coming to me. I have to think about it. But if it comes to somebody, please unmute yourself.
I don't know if this works, but even the simple concept, when two people carry, it's not the same, but when one person carries and one person carries, you can only carry so much. But when two people carry, you can carry much more. So it creates an extra strength. It creates something more. I don't know if it's the same concept, but it leans towards that a little bit in the positive way. Two people together can do something much more than each one individually. So it's a new thing. You've created
Actually,
something.
Esther, what you jogged a memory for me. Again, I know that it's positive, Chana, but I think in Hilchos Shabbos, if two people are doing a malacha that one person could do, then neither one of them is actually trespassing the malacha. Again, midaraisa. So maybe that's a little bit less abrasive of an example than the half a piece of pork.
Maybe on a positive note, let's say you have to lane the parsha and 2 or 3 people share the laning.
That's interesting.
But
And then-
but there you're not talking about two halves or particles that are not in of themselves distinctive, because originally each aliyah was read by somebody else.
Right, but you didn't read the whole parsha until all the aliyahs were put together.
But that doesn't seem like what it's saying.
Right?
It doesn't
Because
seem
each
like
aliyah
it's
stands on
saying-
its own.
I'm saying
I'm
to
just-
share a mitzvah rather than share an avera, so to speak.
Right.
I'm just looking at snow falling, and it's just such a basic example of like each of those flakes is so irrelevant if you look at them, and then as they come together, there's something that's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. But that again, Chani, I think is more an example of the second modality. The first, because a snowflake is still a snowflake. The first is that it doesn't have a metzias of its own.
There's a
Until it's joined.
Messias, but it doesn't have any power. It has nothing to itself in a way. It's like it disappears as soon as it arrives.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I hear you.
Could you say a man and woman coming together to create a child? Neither could do it without the other, so they're both required and necessary, and it's not happening without either one.
I don't think so, Miriam, because then you're saying that they're not anything by themselves. In other words, what's being underscored in the first is Kol echad min hapratim einai metzias b'fnei atzmai. A woman is metzias b'fnei atzma. A man is a metzias b'fnei atzmai.
Right, they're mitzias, but they can't accomplish what they need to without the other, so it's a different category.
But that's the second
Ooh,
example.
you are on a roll this morning. You are so politically incorrect. I'm
How
not gonna
about, I
record
don't
you.
know
I'm
how
not gonna
logically
record
how
you
this
for the vote,
goes.
please.
How about if you have two doughs and you put them together to make a bracha, you put them together and you have enough to take challah from it. You combine them into one dough separately. Each one can't be made take challah from it, but if you push them, combine them.
That's good, because now you're talking again about the idea of a shiur.
Right, but a positive shear, not pork.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So the first is that it doesn't have a metzias on its own. When you put it together, it becomes a metzias. The second is that each one of the distinctive aspects does have a metzias. But when you put them together, there's an additional holiness or additional force. It's like on steroids. And Gimel, and then the third modality is Kol echad mehapratim eina metzias chashuva b'fnei atzmai. Each one of the aspects is not an important existence in and of itself. Aval kashehem misachadim umishava mehem klal, azai kol prat mekabel chashivus gam la'atzmai. But when you bring them together and they become part of something collective, then retroactively, each detail, each subparticle becomes important in and of itself. Al derech zeh yesh loymar b'mishkan u'beis hamikdash gufa. And so in like fashion, we might say about the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. Hachatzer, Ayam Mayed, V'Kodesh HaKadoshim, Kishakol Echad Mehem Hu B'fnei Atzmai, B'terem Kayemes HaMatir Shal Kol HaMishkan U'Kedushasai, Hanakivon Shematzias Kedusha Mishkan Eina Ba'olam, Memela Ein Chalois Kedusha Ala Chatzer V'Chulei. So the courtyard, the Ayam Mayed, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, each one by itself, before the Mishkan was put up in its totality and achieved its holiness. So because there wasn't yet the holiness of the Mishkan in the world, so therefore there wasn't holiness that devolved upon each sub aspect of it. But once the whole Mishkan of Mikdash was erected, then the sanctity came upon each individual aspect. The courtyard, Ayamayed, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Noisaf al Hakdusha HaKlalis da HaMishkan v'HaMikdash. So each aspect got its own Kedusha, in addition to the general Kedusha of the Mikdash. V'yesh loymar, and we might say, shekedushas hachalokim b'mkoima emedes, that the holiness of the individuated aspects remains, afilu bin soya hamishkan, even when the Mishkan was traveling, meaning ubepirukai, it was dismantled. Oy mishachar beis hamikdash haklal, or when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, but it still remains holy min haTorah. Ela sheyesh leimar shakdusha hanisheres hi rak midirabanan. And then there are those that say that the kedusha that remains is midirabanan.
Can you explain how that's different from the minyan?
Yes, because in the minyan, the additional holiness is focused on the klal, on the collective, right? Every Jew is holy. Every Jew is a tzaddik, as we know. And but then when you bring them all together, there's an additional force. Okay. Here it's in a way the opposite. Nothing has holiness by itself. But once you put it all together and you erect a Mishkan, then retroactively, there's a holiness that is vested in each particular. Is that answering your question?
Practically speaking, though, wasn't there holiness attached to each section, regardless of its being attached?
So the Rebbe is saying, not until the whole Mishkan was set up did the individual aspects have holiness. Whereas in a minyan, every yid has kedusha. Then when you're mitzaref them for a minyan, then there's a new level.
Okay, thank
Now
you.
the Rebbe is going to explain l'may nafkamina. What's the difference? Who cares? But first, see if hey. And so now we're going to take this and relate this to the kelim of the Mishkan. Aleph. In the first modality, betchila, ein bahem shum chashivos. At the beginning, the kelim of the Mishkan have no import. They have no holiness. Like the half a shear of Reish Lakish. It doesn't take up any import. Aval la'achar gemara siyas kol hakelim, or la'achar comes hamishkan v'achnasas hakelim by b'pam harishona. But after you finish making all the kelim, or after you erect the mishkan and you bring all the kelim in for the first time, azai mishave mitzius hamishkan. That's when you've created the existence of the mishkan, and then nikra mikdash. It's called a sanctified place. Aval gam oz Ve'einhem mikablim geder shel chashivos pratis. But according to the first modality, even then, they do not receive their own individuated importance. Ella heim rak al derech chelkei guf habinyan. They are part of the greater body of the construction. Krashi hamishkan v'hayiriyos, the planks, the curtains. Kishem she'elu einam ella chalokim hamarkivim es hamishkan al derech zeh b'negei lekelim. Just like the planks or the curtains are just aspects of which the Mishkan is comprised, the same thing with the Kelim. B'signan acher, to say it a little bit differently, Geder HaMishkan, hu sheyeshnam yiriyos, akrashim, adanim, v'shulchan, menorah, umizbechais. The category of Mishkan is something that has all these different subsidiary things. And just like the planks and the adanim, the base, the bases, and the curtains, they're only parts of the construction. In the same way, the kelim, the vestments of the Mishkan, the menorah, the shulchan, they don't have individuated import. And we learn that people were not allowed to come and look at the kelim when they were being wrapped up to travel, which is talking about after the Mishkan is dismantled. According to this would be a new commandment. And it's not a derivative of the commandment that speaks to the holiness of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's a separate thing. Because according to this first modality, the kelim by themselves have no chashivos. Like the chatzi shir. No chashivos. Beis. According to the second modality, hakelim yesh lehem chashivos mitzad atzmam, gam lefnei sheyeshna hamishkan b'shleimusay. According to the second way of understanding this, every keli has holiness in and of itself before the Mishkan is erected in its completion. Hamenorah hi'inim b'fnei atzmai, v'al derech zeh hashulchan v'hamizbechos. The menorah, the table, the two altars, each one has distinctive holiness. But it's only that when you bring them into the Mishkan, then they bring the Mishkan to completion. And now you have a new thing, just like you have a minyan out of 10 Jews, now you have a complete Mishkan. And then you have the third modality. Mitzad atzmam be'es asiyasam, ein bahem kol chashivus mitzad atzmam. By themselves, when you make them, they don't have import. But once you bring it into the Mishkan, once you erect the Mishkan, chola al kol keli ukeli chashivas b'fnei atzmai, then each one of the kelim is vested with import. Now, this is in contradistinction to the first modality, where a half a shear by itself will always be a half a shear. You could bring it together, but then when you separate again, it's nothing. But here, no, once you bring the kelim into the Mishkan, each one is now vested with individuated sanctity. Yeredes kedusha pratis miyuchedes l'chol kli la'atzmai. There is an individuated sanctity that comes down and is vested in each distinctive kelim. Kedushas menorah, kedushas shulchan v'chulei. Noisaf al kedusha klolis kechelik b'kedushas hamishkan b'chlal. And this individuated holiness, sanctity, is in addition to the collective holiness of the Mishkan. Vav. V'yesh loymar, the Rebbe says that we might say, achas mehanafka mina ladina sheben haifanim hanal. So what's practically the difference? One of the differences, ala halacha, would be as follows. Asiyas kli hamishkan or mikdas tricha liyos lishma. Ein oisin kol hakelim mitchilasan ela l'shem hekdesh. We're coming now to Pesach, and we know that when matzahs are made, we say l'shem matzahs mitzvah. When a Sefer Torah is written, l'shem kedusha Sefer Torah, etc., etc. We have this idea. So when the kelim of the Mishkan were being fashioned, they had to be made lishma, for the name of Hashem. Like it says, you don't make these kelim except for a holy purpose, for a sanctified purpose, that it has to be uppermost in the mind of who is fashioning them, that this is hekdesh, that this is holy. V'nafkamina b'davar, mahu teichana shel hakavana lishma. And so the difference between these three modalities in terms of how you relate the individual aspect to the collective whole would be reflected in the kavana that you have to have when you're making the keli. La'if and harishain, according to the first modality, shegedar kelim ena ella heyoisem chelek mehamishkan. So according to the first modality, that the kelim only have viability or import or efficacy when they are part of something larger, the Mishkan. So when you're making the kelim, the kavana, the intention has to be for the holiness of the Mishkan. Because in and of themselves, it's like a half a piece. It's nothing. In accordance with the second modality, where each individuated aspect has its own importance and its own viability, even before they become part of the collective of the Mishkan, so when you're fashioning that keli, the kavana, the intention has to be for the individual kedusha of that keli, the kedusha of the menorah, the kedusha of the shulchan. And if you're looking from the perspective of the third modality, Hari me'acha shebasiyas hakelim b'achnasosam lemishkan chal loy rak Hashem hakloli b'hakdusha hakloli shel mishkan elagam kedusha b'fnei atzma. In the third modality, after you bring the kelim into the Mishkan, there's not just the general holiness of the Mishkan, but there is also the individuated holiness of each keli. That at the very beginning, when you're fashioning the keli, you have to have both kavanas. Lishma l'shem mitzvahs kedushas hamishkan, u'lishma prati l'shem hakli prati. You have to have the kavana for the collective, the mishkan, and you have to have the kavana for the particular, the keli. The alpizeh yesh loymar. And once we understand this, we might say, remember the Rebbe asked in the terminology of the Rambam and Sefer HaMitzvahs, after he says all of these are part of the Mishkan and all of it is called Mikdash, then after this he says, he doubles back and he says that there was already an individuated commandment for each particular part. And so now the Rebbe says once we understand that there are three ways of relating to the parts vis-a-vis the collective, we can now understand that the words of the Rambam Milamdeinu teach us she'af al pi shezeh haklal mitzvahs v'asuli mikdash kol minim rabim, that even while we're talking about something general, make me a mikdash, and that comprises many subsidiary aspects, that from the beginning, the mitzvah to make a mishkan, it includes all the kelim. But at the same time, because there was also a commandment about each specific keli, chola olav kedusha b'fnei atzma la'achri gmar asiyasei ka'ofen hashlishi, u'memela hakavana l'shma sheba'asiyas hakelim tzricha liyos ba'ofen zeh. But since in that third modality, there is a holiness that is vested, particularly in each keli after the completion of the whole Mishkan, therefore, the Rambam is signaling to us, the Rambam is broadcasting to us that there has to be both kavanas when you make the kelim. There has to be the general and there has to be the specific. Zayin. V'zehu haremez b'nesinas Hashem Vayakhel leparsha ha'isekes b'asiyas kol chelkei Mishkan. And now with this new information, we are in a position to appreciate the allusion embedded in the name Vayakhel for a parsha that seems to be completely focused on enumerating the individual aspects. Vayakhel moira al oifen asiyas hakelim. The term Vayakhel, to gather, teaches us about the way in which these kelim should be made, meaning the mindset when you approach this. Shepa'ulas melechas hamishkan b'chol kelev nasisa ba'ofen shel Vayakhel, that this whole enterprise of building the Mishkan and all the kelim has to come from this collective perspective. Kiloimar, that is to say, because of vayas, even though it says vayas and it should be made, meaning that each keli is being given prominence in and of itself. Hare hakavana ba'asiyas kol keli v'keli loy ha'sarak b'toiras asiya u'pu'ula prati shel kli prati. But the fashioning of each keli was not just about, and not just in the way that this is about the individuated keli, Vayakhel, but rather it was done with the spirit or the energy, or from the perspective of Vayakhel, Hakola v'ichud shel kol chelkei hamishkan lasiyas mishkan echad. It's about the gathering. It's about the amalgam that is comprised of all these separated aspects for the purpose of making one Mishkan. Vitam hadavar. And what's the reason for this? Why is this important? Ki b'terem nishlam hamishkan ein l'chol kli b'fnei atzmei chashivas la'atzmei. Kol inyanei hu hayoseh prat mitoich haklal hamishkan. Because before the Mishkan was completed, each keli by itself did not have self-import. Its entire existence is about it being an aspect of a collective. Ulam, however, but Parshas Pekudei, on the other hand, when you come to Parshas Pekudei, that all of the work for the construction of the Mishkan was concluded, and the Parsha describes the way in which the Mishkan was erected and all of the kelim that were put into the Mishkan. Hine az horgash ha'inin shel Pekudei. Then the idea of the individual is felt. Sheyesh nagam metzia shel protim b'fnei atzma. It's only in the collective that you can appreciate the individual. The loyraka in akloli shel mishkan kanal, and in Pekudei we can appreciate not just the general thing that we have a mishkan, but the individual aspects. Ki la'achar hakamas hamishkan kuloi mischadeshes hachashivus shebechol kli b'fnei atzmai. Because it's only after the whole Mishkan is constructed that there is a novel appreciation for each subsidiary, individuated, specific aspect. I don't know. I have to think more about this, but maybe you could say that it's only in the context of an orchestra that you actually appreciate the distinctiveness of each individual instrument. Ches. Kol inyan b'Torah inyan nitzchi v'hayra nitzchis. Every concept in the Torah is eternal and is an eternal lesson. Valachas kama v'kama hamishkan, and how much more so when we're talking about the Mishkan. She'en yonayu v'asu l'migdav shechanti b'soicham b'soich kol echad ve'echad. So how much more so when we're talking about the Mishkan, which is about Hashem wanting to rest between amongst each one of us individually. Move on, and so it's understood. She'inin hanal, the above stated concept, shel Vayakhel Pekudei, shebebinyan hamishkan yesh negam bekim v'shechanti b'seichem b'negei Yisrael. So these two ideas of collective and individual and particular, that this binary that exists vis-a-vis the construction of the Mishkan, is certainly found in the idea of the Mishkan within each one of us. Mitzad achas, on one hand, Aimeres HaTorah shekol b'nei Yisrael him tzibor echad. The Torah teaches that we're all one entity. V'chol Yisrael yachad mitzdarfim l'koima achas shlema, and together we make one body. And therefore, kasha yesh chisaron chas v'sholom shel Yehudi echad, yesh chisaron b'koima shlema kula. When there's some kind of deficit in one Jew, it's a deficit in the whole body of Jews. That's on one hand. On the other hand, the Torah teaches that every Jew is a world unto themselves. So much so that each person is obligated to say, the world was created for me. Kol ha'olam, the entire universe was created for me. Kol seder shtalshlus, the whole system of devolution, kol gam kol echad ve'echad b'nei Yisrael b'shvili nivra, and every single Jew was born for me. V'chol echad mechuyev loymar kain v'afilu choyte beitzecha v'shoyev mimecha me'agadol shebegdolim v'ad ha'katan shebektanim. And it's not just seemingly quote unquote important Jews, but the water carrier, the wood chopper, from the greatest to the seemingly less important, has to understand that the entire world and all the galaxies and every single person was created for them. And at the same time, we're just part of a larger collective. And this is where we get the Hayra from the names of the Parshias. This is spectacular. Yehudi ola lachshoiv, a Jew might think, shalachol l'roish harehu metzias b'fnei atzmai. That first of all, he's an individual. Loi metzias yesh chas v'shalom. He shouldn't be thinking about this in terms of arrogance. Ela metzias dekdusha, but he is a holy, self-contained construct. B'tor ben Yisrael, because he's a Jew. Eved melech melech. Like the halacha says, that the servant of a king has the same halacha as the king, meaning we are Hashem's children, so we are all important. And it's all about l'shamish iskainai, to serve our master. Yesh lo tafkid b'avodas hamiyuchadim lo. Now, to serve his master, there are specific missions and aspects of work that are distinctive to him. But in addition to his particular, distinctive, individuated avodah, he also understands himself to be part of a collective. But the Rebbe says that if that's how you're thinking about yourself, that first of all, you're a Metzias, and then you're also part of something larger. The Rebbe says, so the parsha comes to teach you. The parsha comes to disabuse you of your thought. Because the parsha is telling you, Shabasiyas klei mishkan, haisa asiyas kol keli, asiya nifredes masiyas kol shara kelim. Ad shalachol keli nemar because of bayas mishaloi. That in the parsha, each keli was fashioned individually, and it's presented in a very individuated manner, because for each keli it says vayas, it was made, it was fashioned. hamitzayin es hatchonos hamiyuchadas lekli zeh. And so this only points to the individual properties of each keli. Umi kol makayim, and still in all, Aimeres Tayas Emesh Shezeu Inishal Vayakhel. And still the Torah comes and tells us that this is part of a collective. It's Vayakhel. Kol mitziusam ha'isa b'yosem chelek min hamishkan kulay. The name Vayakhel comes to underscore that their entire existence hinges on their being part of the collective. And so therefore, a Jew has to know Shaha haschola unekudas hatoichen shel kol inyanim hi lecholareish she'olav lichlol atzmei biyachad im kol shar Yisrael. So it's the opposite of what you might think. First of all, you're part of Bnei Yisrael. You have to perceive yourself as a part of something larger. Vayakhel. V'zois ba'ofen she'ikar kol mitziyosei hu heyosei chelek mirakol. And so the main aspect of your identity has to be the way in which you are an aspect of something larger. And therefore, before a person turns to pray for their personal needs, and this is after all a mitzvah to daven for yourself personally, but before that, he has to embed himself into the collective. You have to start with saying, I hereby take upon myself the positive mitzvah of loving every Jew. And it's not just before you start davening, but during davening, we're taught al tifresh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the collective. Because if you look at the wording, at the terminology of davening, you see that all of our bakashes, all of our requests are not in the singular. As you would expect if it's a person asking for their individual needs. But everything is coached in plural and collective terminology. V'chanenu me'itcha, grant us, hashivenu avinu, return us. V'al derech zeh b'chol habrachos, avor kol Yisrael ke'echad. And in like fashion, all of the blessings, all of our requests are made in the plural for all of us together. Ume'idach gisa, and on the other hand, at the same time, kasher adam oisek bepu'ula leman haklal. When a person is engaged in efforts for the collective, hu alo lavoy lidei maskana she'avoda mesuyem zu eila kol shaychos l'shleimusoi ha'ishis. He might come to the conclusion that whatever he's doing for the klal, whatever he's doing for the community, really is not contributing to his own completion, to the way that he's building himself. He might think that his coming to fruition as a human being is more dependent on what he does as an individual. But it's only he's doing this from an altruistic place. He's doing this because the klal needs him. So he's mevater, he gives up on what he needs for himself in order to do for the collective. And the Rebbe says, no, you're so wrong. And so to disabuse you of this, the Parsha tells us, Adrabah, it's the opposite. On the contrary, Hakamas Hamishkan Avor Klal Yisrael Hi Ba'ofen Shel Pekudei. The erection of the Mishkan for the collective, for Klal Yisrael, is referred to as Pekudei, enumerating, differentiating, individuating, particular. Kol echad me'akelim nispar v'kibel chashivas b'nifrad. Hein be'ez hava asay al Moshe. Hein la'achar mikein b'tivor Hashem l'Moshe oidas kli zeh. V'hein la'achar mikein b'kiyam ha'tivor oidas kli al yidei Moshe. over and over, 3 times over in Pekudei, each keli receives its own individuated import when it's brought to Moshe. And then when there's a commandment to Moshe about what should be done with it. And then when Moshe keeps those commandments about each individual keli, because this teaches us, Kasher Yehudi Poya Leman Klal Yisrael. When a Jew is busy doing things for Klal Yisrael, Hadaver Makne Shleimus Gam Loi Atzmai B'Tur Yachid. This overture for supposedly the Klal actually allows the individual to acquire their completion, makes them more complete. Tess. Tam hadavar she'eskala lozu muchreches. Shebe'ei she'adam oisek binyanav hapratim tzarech she'eskayim vayakhel l'eskala l'matzibor. Why is this hiskalalos? Why is this bringing together so necessary? That when a person is busy with his own seemingly personal things, that it has to be with the energy of Vayakhel, that he has to embed himself in the tzibor, in the collective. Umeidach, and on the other hand, Hakamas Hamishkan Avor Klal Yisrael Hi Ba'ofen Shel Umevia L'Dei Pekudei, Hashleimu Shel Kol Yehudi B'Toich Yachid. And on the other hand, when you're talking about something collective, what you're focusing on is the way in which it highlights the individual. In other words, why is it so important for the intersectionality to exist here? That in the prat, it's always through the energy of the klal. And when you're dealing with the klal, it highlights the prat. Why is this so important? Ki be'etzem, because essentially, Eitzel Yehudi, when you're talking about a Jew, Shnei inyanim elu, Vayakhel shaboy, Pekudei shaboy, Chad hema. Because when you're talking about a Jew, the collective and the individual are one. They're one. V'lachein biriboy b'roiv hashanim parshis Vayakhel Pekudei mechubares. And that's why in the main, most years, Vayakhel and Pekudei are read together. Which means that essentially they become one parsha. And now the Rebbe is going to explain this very deep and beautiful, important idea. On the revealed and external level, b'darga shel giluyim, on the level where things can be revealed. Haklal v'haprat oimdim b'stira zeh lezeh. So on that topical level, the collective and the individual are diametrically opposed ideas. It's one or the other. Ba'al kol panim, him shnei inyanei shleim u'sheinim v'nefradim. At the very least, they are two very different things. Even if you don't want to say that they present the antithesis of each other, they're two different things. And so when you underscore the collective, you weaken the importance of the individual. And the more and the more you focus on the individual, you take away from the importance of the collective. But in contradistinction, but when you're talking about the essence and the innermost core of a Jew, the Rebbe quotes the Tanya, that we're all one because we all have one Father. And this is because we're all part of the Atzmus, the essence of Hashem. When you're talking about Atzmus, there's no contradiction between the proliferation of individuated aspects and the idea of the unity. What Hasidus calls the pshitos, the simplicity, or the aspect that is divested of any specific category. Ukiyadu, as is known, shedafka mitzad apshitus delamayla ba riba hischalkos dafka, that it's specifically because everything is rooted in one thing that there can't be so much differentiation and plurality and multifariousness in this world. I don't know a lot of science, but somebody should correct me, but is this not the whole idea of stem cells? So what makes them so invaluable is that they have this quality where they could become any type of cell, but the stem cell itself has this pshitos, this all-encompassing, non-delineated feature about it. Ukiyadua, sorry, we did that. Kiloimar, this is to say, yesh kan ribuy v'hischalkos. Yes, we recognize that there is multiplicity. We recognize that there is differentiation. But not only is this multiplicity not antithetical to the singularity, ela adraba, on the contrary, haribui hagadol mivate o migale es hapshitos d'l'mayla. It's specifically through the multiplicity that you express, that you reveal, that you showcase the singularity that is above. And that's why this also is reflected in a Jew, because Yisrael v'kuchabricha kul echad. Because this is true about Atzmos, this is true about every Jew. Shezeh shebnei Yisrael mitzdarfim kulam la'am echad. The fact that we are all part of something larger called Am Echad is not mutually exclusive to the existence of each Jew as an individual. Kim adraba, rather the contrary. Because the way in which we are united comes from the essence of us, asher hi b'atzmusa yisbarach kul echad, and in essence we are one with the essence of Hashem. Vayakhel, harei achdu zu ba lidei bitui gam b'metzius b'hatzir haprati shel kol Yehudi, and so this oneness is also revealed in the individual construct. So it's like, oh my gosh, what's that term where? Oh gosh, the term is eluding me, where you cut something and you don't get a piece, but you get a smaller version of the whole. It's hologram.
Like the stones from
A
Har Sinai?
hologram. Sorry?
Is that like the stones from Har Sinai?
Possibly, but this is like holographic, that you don't get pieces, you get a smaller version of the whole. So every Jew is reflective of Atzmos. In Atzmos, you have the totality that is not a stira, but rather gives rise to the particularities. Yud. Al derech hachibor bein Vayakhel Pekudei sheyeshna b'negei Yisrael. And this is like the connection between Vayakhel Pekudei that is relevant to Jews. Al derech zeh nimtza b'gilui ha'ichud bein haklal v'aprat Vayakhel Pekudei b'sefer Torah. And you could see this same connection between the collective and the individual in a Sefer Torah. Now remember, this was when the Rebbe was koching in this project. Sefer Torah morkav mimeas alafim shel oisios nifrodai zu bezu. On the one hand, a Sefer Torah is comprised of hundreds of thousands of letters that are distinct from each other. V'chol pratei ha'oisios halalu yotzim Torah achas. And yet, all of these individuated letters create one Torah. So you have the Inyan of Pekudei, and they have the Torah, and they have the Inyan of Vayakhel. So on one hand, the individual create the collective, Vayakhel. Umeidach, on the other hand, kasher hakol misachel l'sefer Torah echad v'yachid. But when it all becomes one Torah, bishleimus, toikvay kutushasai, then you have the completion and the strength of its holiness, of its sacredness. Azai kol ois biktushasa mukefes gvil. Then each letter in its distinctive sacredness is surrounded by white space on the parchment. Muvdeles mishar kala esies. So dafka, when all the letters yield to the collective, they become one Sefer Torah, then the distinctiveness of each letter is only highlighted. Because if two letters are connected and you can't distinguish one from another, that disqualifies the holiness of the Sefer Torah. Because once we understand that Bnei Yisrael, the Torah, and Hashem are one, so this whole idea of how we are individual and part of something larger, and how this is rooted in the fact that we have a part of Atzmus in us, and in Atzmus there's no stira, there's no contradiction between the klal and the pratim. So this is also showcased in the idea of the Torah, because Bnei Yisrael, Torah and Hashem are one. V'zuhi ha'ira nesinas chakoyach hanesinas miparshas Vayakhel Pekudei. And this is the lesson and also the strength that we are given from these parshas. Lahaisif yoiser bezirus la'ached es kol bnei Yisrael. We should add, in moving quickly with alacrity, to unite bnei Yisrael. Ubechlal zeh gam be'inish hazman grama. And in this category, also the Rebbe says, in this timely mitzvah that we're talking about right now, that everybody should put more emphasis and do this more quickly to make sure that every Jew has one letter in one of the Torahs that are being written for the klal, to unite. These Sifrei Torah are not being written for individuals. They're being written for the sole purpose of uniting Jews. And through this is revealed the connection of every Jew to Torah. And each Jew becomes included in the Torah through the letter that is written for him. So the Rebbe says two things are being accomplished. Each Jew in their individuality is being showcased because there's a letter in the Sefer Torah that's just for them. And without that letter, the whole Sefer Torah is not valid. And at the same time, you're highlighting the shleimus, the completion of Am Yisrael as a collective. That all of Bnei Yisrael are united in a true unity through the Torah, which is true and eternal. And therefore, it's an eternal unity. And through this, through acting with greater alacrity in this mitzvah, we will hasten and bring closer, even closer, the geula, the true geula, the complete geula, shatia geula pratis. There will be an individual geula, like it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu eiches biyadav mamash ish Hashem will hold the hands of each Jew and grab him from his place. Ke'inyan shenemar, like Rashi says in Itzavim, he cites these words from the Navi, Va'atem to look to le'echad b'nei Yisrael. Each Jew will be collected one by one. And at the same time, it will be a collective geula, like it says, Kohol gadol yeshuvu hena. A great assemblage will return here, and there should be bimhera biyamenu mamash. It should be speedily in our days, literally mamash.
Amen.
The collective and the individual. Nu
Thank
Esther
you.
Zog L'chaim.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Till Esther opens her mic. Nechami, it was a great pleasure to have your son here.
He had a great time.
So nice. Such a great group of.
Obviously, we did a lot of comparing news to how
We
many.
were very blessed. Oh, yeah. Well, what do you think my kids do? They come home and tell us how stunted our operation is.
No, Chas v'shalom, it was all good.
No, I'm saying what my kids do when they go somewhere else. It's all part of it.
Yeah, but he had a really good time. I'm so
I
happy.
guess it's all part of the collective and the individuated.
Yeah. He told me, he said one of the kids dressed up as Chat GPT. And I'm like, only at Binghamton. They're dressing up like Anyway, thank you for hosting him.
It was our greatest pleasure. They were amazing. They were really amazing. Baruch Hashem.
And thank you for the share while we're at it, while I'm thanking you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Come
Can
on,
I
somebody gonna
can I
say
say
something?
something
So we
about
can
the
cover it?
Sikha?
Sorry,
Can I say something about the Sikha?
please.
It seems to me that it has a tremendous lesson, hara'ah, if that's the right word, about chinuch. And when one, let's say it's a class, or whether even if it's within a family, but more like in a school, where on the one hand, you have individuals coming together and you have, I guess, an agenda, should I say, in the school or even in your own family. On the other hand, not to lose sight of the individual and to take into account that you're not just producing a klal, you're producing a prat. And I don't know, the Rebbe doesn't point this out, but he is saying it, you know, there's a lesson there that I think that's very, very powerful.
100%. In general, we see in the Rebbe's Torah, we see a emphasis on klal and prat constantly. It's like, look at what the Rebbe Kochzachin. On the one hand, Hakel. Hakel is all about the klal.
Right.
But then in Shnas Hakel, the Rebbe said to take all the names of the people and write each name on an individual note card. It's again the Indian of prat, over and over and over. It's a binary that the Rebbe pushes.
You know, it's interesting, Rivky, that you can always have individuals, but you cannot have a klal without individuals. The klal is dependent on individuals. But the Rebbe is saying here that a klal is not just made up of individuals, that the klal has its own keiches. I'm just thinking out loud, trying to figure out how to put this together. The klal, once it's a klal, it has its own keiches. But the keiches of the klal goes back to the oneness of Eibishter. So it still goes back to the yichid of the Eibishter, to oneness.
That's right. I want to push
So
back.
It's an interesting circle. Go ahead. What?
Yeah. But I think the Rebbe wants to actually disabuse us of thinking that without a klal, there's a prat. I think one of the chidushim here is that the Rebbe is saying that without the klal, you don't really have the prat. You might think you're an individual, but really the importance of your individuality stems from the fact that you're part of a klal.
How can we express ourselves if we're not expressing ourselves with other people? We don't live alone. It brings out what we are capable of doing.
Yeah, but if you look at it just physically, not right. The klal has nothing. It's made up of individuals. What else is it made up of? Individuals exist. You can say the Eibusha will not make it exist because if there's no klal, then there's no purpose to prat. You can say that. But if you look at physical world, individuals are individuals. It's a gashmistic, people are people. Whereas community or klal or kohol is made up of them. And if you take that out of there, it's like if you take out the ingredients of a cake, you're not going to have a cake, but you'll still have the ingredients.
Maybe it's more like DNA. If you
No,
don't
no,
have
I think-
common DNA, you don't have individual parts of the body.
I'm not sure what, I'm just saying that whatever.
There is a commonality. Let's say you're making a cake and you have flour and sugar and whatever. There is something in common between them. I'm not quite sure what, but in a body, I can call it the DNA. So you wouldn't have a person if you wouldn't have hands and, well, technically you would, but if you wouldn't have a heart and a brain and a whatever, all these parts, you wouldn't have the klal of a person. But if you didn't have DNA in the hand, which was, or in the heart or in the brain or whatever, that's what the DNA is, a certain klalus that you have to have in order to have individuals. Just like attempt to look to a chad lechad, that's what I was having trouble with. But then I realized it's because they are part of Bnei Yisrael, each individual is important. And because you have your DNA, your brain is important, your heart is there, each part of you is there. But on the other hand, you as a person are made of all these parts. It's I don't know how to explain it. You can't even, it's something that you can't really wrap your head around, because it's like the concept of learning Torah, where you're surrounding Hashem and Hashem is surrounding you. That's the same kind of a concept. You are an individual because of the klal, and the klal is there because of you. All the yous in it.
Right.
Which is, it's a concept that can blow your mind, because it doesn't really, we can't really imagine that physically, but it's a blow your mind concept. Anyway, to me it is.
I guess what I was trying to say is that this is very applicable today with what's going on politically in the world,
Right.
Whatever, all the politics are going on in the world, with what takes precedence is community or people. But the Rebbe is bringing out here that the makeup of, at least the way I'm trying to figure it out, that the makeup of the community depends on the collective individuals. You cannot take away the quality or the need for the individual differences, or the individual, that what makes one an individual, right? And you take all those kaiches together to make a klal. No, that's not what I was saying. What I find interesting is that the klal without individuals doesn't exist. This is the way the physical world is. That's the outcome that we see. Maybe behind the scenes, it's differently.
No, I think you're right. But I think what the Rebbe is fetching here.
The Rebbe brings out that the klal itself adds a certain strength, but it all goes back to the oneness of Eibishter. You understand? It's like, so you now get a whole different element when you have a klal. I think it's, for today's time, such a huge thing to put together, that you cannot separate the two in the sense this is more important or this is more important. Working together will make it, individuals working together, I don't know, whatever. You understand, Rivky? I'm trying.
No, I think I understand, but I think you're not focusing enough, I think, on the other thing that the Rebbe is saying here, that really your prat
Is the purpose,
like you're saying, it's there before, but it only really gains its importance, its kedusha, its viability, its metzias from becoming part of something larger.
part. No, I think it's fascinating. I'm not negating one or the other. I think it's fascinating that it's how interconnected it is, how it's very different than what people view it. politics, very different, you know what I mean?
Right,
That
and it is very
either
applicable
individual
to
or
today.
Mhm.
Yeah, because they're saying that, all this, so many people being depressed and the suicidal thoughts and what have you has a lot to do with the focus on the self as opposed to becoming part of something larger.
Mhm.
The Rebbe would always say, what can you do? Not what people can do for me, what can I do for somebody else?
Yeah.
That was his mantra, really.
And that's what they say to people who feel suicidal is go out and do something for somebody else, and then you won't feel suicidal anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, the self is a very small, circumscribed place. Gets very claustrophobic.
Yes, yes. We're just here to help, make the world a dear b'tachtonim. And if we focus on that, we can't do it on our own. The world is a platform for us to just keep giving and giving, not taking.
But if you're not complete, I'm not expressing it properly, but if you're not whole, you can't give. So
Okay, so the
it's a double.
And at the same time, you become more whole by giving. So it's a
Exactly.
loop. It's a feedback loop.
Yeah.
I found a letter from the Rebbe that he gave out a long time ago, and a Hakel year. And the Rebbe gave out this letter in Slichus at the end of the Hakel year. And he said, when all is said and done, and you've done everything, now look at yourself and see, have you gathered yourself together? And this was like at the end of the year, before Rosh Hashanah, in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, that we should look at ourselves and gather ourselves together. That was after the year, at the end of the year, before Rosh Hashanah. And that to me was like a very powerful. You'd think he would have said it at the beginning of the year now, and then start giving out. But no, give. And then, prepare yourself for Rosh Hashanah, because this is the time when you have to be whole and complete and present yourself to the Eibishter as a whole person. Don't forget about yourself. But that, like 1 month in Elul before Rosh Hashanah, the whole year you've been giving and giving. I can't remember what year it was. I have it somewhere. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, whatever way you cut it, we have our work cut out for us. Wishing everybody a lot of hatzlacha.
Everybody should do it b'simcha. That's the main thing.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Kol tov.
Thank you so much. Thank you.